You ever wondered what would happen if Game of Thrones met Starfield? Well, neither did I until I read this book. At least I can only imagine that's what a sci-fi Game of Thrones would be like. I've only ever watched the Game of Thrones TV series and have not read the books yet. I could only get a few hours into Starfield before I got bored. A Memory Called Empire is a debut novel from American author Arkady Martine. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And this is a pen name. Her real name is Anna Linden Weller, and it was published in 2019 and won the 2020 Hugo Award for Best Novel. The story follows Mahit Desmare. There's going to be a lot of pronunciations I didn't realise I couldn't say until I have to read it out. Of LaSalle Station, she becomes the ambassador to the monumental Teixkalani Empire following the mysterious death of her predecessor, Yxander Aghavan. Within her head she secretly contains an imago machine, a neural implant that contains the memories and personality matrix of Aghavan that allows her to communicate with him in a way, utilising his experience to navigate the complex alien culture that is extremely arrogant and, as respectfully as is possible, considers her to be a barbarian. One problem, however, is that her imago is 15 years out of date. Worse still, the political machinations of the Empire threaten LaSalle, and she must navigate the dangerous terrain that her predecessor had woven himself into before he met his untimely demise. One of the most impressive aspects of this novel is the world building. It's subtle, not in your face, and is not laboriously explained in a series of lengthy conversations and information dumps as is present in Dune or Lord of the Rings, for example. The 462 pages for the hardback edition, and surely as a debut written to function as a standalone novel with no guarantee of a sequel, which was released, entitled A Desolation of Peace, which I shall hopefully be reading soon, the novel is not as long as many other SF or fantasy novels. The pacing and structure is so that the world building is never the primary focus, instead the story is. This allows for much better fluidity within the prose, which makes a novel an absolute page-turner, and those little aspects of the wider lore acting as delicious morsels that make you want to keep reading for more. For some hardcore SF and fantasy fans, this may be a little off-putting, as the details some may have come to expect from genre fiction of this ilk is not present. For example, some of the technology is not explained, or if it is done, it's done in very little detail. Examples being faster-than-light travel and the functioning of the imago machines. These things are simply just present, and the audience is forced to accept that these things are present and a part of the world. Additionally, beyond the political situation, the crisis being far more of an appropriate term, that Mahit finds himself embroiled in, the wider world is only relayed to us in short bursts, largely due to the third-person limited perspective that the novel is written in, which ensures that the only information we are privy to is the same information that Mahit knows. I would argue, however, that all these things actually work in the novel's favour, as long as you can see this book as more of a thriller that just happens to be set in a science-fictional setting. Firstly, as previously mentioned, the novel is far more pleasant to read due to the flow not being interrupted by large sections being devoted to explaining the wider world. This is quite a simple and straightforward positive. Second, the third-person limited perspective that the novel takes works with the relatively limited world building. The technology is taken for granted by us because it is taken for granted by Mahit. It is simply a fact of life for her, the complexities of the tech, not something with which she is concerned. I mean, how many modern politicians could confidently explain the precise workings of an internal combustion engine? We shouldn't be surprised when Mahit doesn't know how plasma drives or whatever is used functions. When we hear about events occurring elsewhere, we are forced to experience them as Mahit experiences them, second-hand, often second-hand through an unworthy Teixkalani government official or on the edge of our seat listening to a news report. We become hungry for more information, just as Mahit is, and in this way the novel is particularly immersive. This is another way in which A Memory Called Empire lends itself to being an incredible page-turner as we, as stated before, chase those delicious nuggets of information alongside our main character. Third, the creation of a huge expansive universe is, I would argue, not the point of this novel. It is, as I've said before, at its heart a thriller, a political drama dressed up as a sci-fi novel, but could have been written as a fantasy or historical novel. As a quick aside, I think that a sci-fi political thriller is a welcome breath of fresh air from the many examples we see in the more typical fantasy genre. The wider lore is simply the backdrop against which the drama occurs, lending it the unique twist that will be lost in just another fantasy setting. Aside from the little tidbits we learn about and what is strictly necessary for the plot, any explanation of the universe would not add that much to the novel, in my opinion. The novel is also a commentary upon colonialism, Martine being influenced by the Byzantine and Aztec empires, alongside the idea of modern-day American colonialism. Mahit is an ambassador to an expansionist and warmongering empire that could, and is threatening to, swallow up her little station at any moment, and she loves it. The Teixkalani Empire's language is described as having a poetic flow to it, and poetry is indeed one of the main forms of expression. Mahit, since she was young, has always wanted to visit and stay in Teixkalan, loving the poetry and stories of the empire despite the existential threat that it presented to her way of life. The dedication from the start of the story that Martine inserted exemplifies this aspect of the novel. This book is dedicated to anyone who has ever fallen in love with a culture that was devouring their own. Mahit is most definitely experiencing that same phenomenon. The novel for me therefore addresses the complexity of colonialism, empire, and history as a whole. Having worked my arse off for 3 years to achieve a degree in history, I feel as if I have at least a little authority to say this. Not all of history is black and white. For me, that is one of the first things that we were taught, that empire, regimes and individuals are objects of their time. The aspects we retrospectively consider to be good and evil are largely determined by the entity's enemies, whoever is writing that particular history, and the sensibilities of the time in which it was written. A memory called empire is subtle then, not forcing an opinion upon you, but instead allowing you to see the cultures depicted for what they are, their positives and negatives in all their wonder. Few are innocent of some sort of crime, but do the ends justify the means? Should the crimes being committed be illegal or considered immoral in the first place? Do good intentions in cultural enlightenment outweigh the use of a brutal military to give people what many would consider a much better standard of living, at the cost of their own culture and identity? And can we call these things evil, considering the history is one mess of cultures conflicting, merging, fighting, accepting? I thought that this was the second most interesting aspect of the novel, behind the politics which was thrust forward to be the main focus, of course. In my opinion, the kind of future depicted is probably the kind humanity will actually experience, if the last few thousand years of tumultuous trial data for human civilization we have accrued as a species thus far is anything to go by. Of course, the specifics will be different, but the kind of mess of cultures and the trend of resisting/merging with others will continue. All of this goes to say that this novel is clever. Martine is able to include all of these thoughtful elements to make the reader consider questions not directly asked in a manner that is subtle, and so as to not lead the reader to come to a specific answer. Indeed, to many of the questions, I don't think that I even have answers to them now, despite trying my best to come to some kind of conclusion, and that is something that I love. I haven't even mentioned the elements of poetry and language that permeate through the entire story. I don't think I can do justice to this incredibly nuanced and fascinating element of the book. I can only recommend that you read it and enjoy it for yourself. That is not to say that this novel is perfect. I personally found the tone of the novel somewhat irritating. Specifically, the tone of the characters remains light, despite the situations that they find themselves in and some of the deeply traumatic experiences that they endure. The nature of the conversations after the characters' experiences takes away from the severity of these events. This is likely a personal issue of mine, and I'm sure that Martine was trying to depict how joking and levity can come at the strangest times and help us through hardship, but I found the glib tone irritating as it repeats itself despite the increasing severity of the peril as the plot advanced. Additionally, it is always a bit of a bugbear of mine when characters are able to stay awake for multiple days and function. Just a little nitpick of mine, but past 18 hours and the human body will just not run normally at all, let alone after 36 or 48 hours. Earlier this year I had to drive for 3 hours on 5 hours of sleep, having been awake for 18, eventually able to sleep after 21 hours. That was a weird experience, and I really cannot imagine engaging in high stakes politics after even just that. It's made even worse when the characters are unable to sleep when they finally have a chance. To me it just seems like a boring trope that has no basis in reality. That's just me though. If I wasn't aware of the specific nature of human biology, I don't suppose this part of the novel would have bugged me as much. On the whole, this novel is fantastic. I can get past, but not entirely overlook, the tonal issues in favour of the world it's created and the page-turning political drama that excellently ramps up as the chapter numbers go up. Out of 5 stars, a system that lacks any real kind of nuance, I'm aware, I'll give it 4. It's only held back by my previously stated issues, as well as a relatively flat ending. Something which I hope will be remedied by reading the sequel. The good score is earned by being very intelligent, excellently paced, and including subtle questions that made me consider them extensively. If any part of this review has piqued your interest in this novel, and in any way, go out and get it. You'll enjoy it. There's a reason that it won the 2020 Hugo Award for Best Novel, after all. That's it then from me. Thank you very much for listening to this review, and I hope you enjoyed it and found it interesting. Remember to follow me on Twitter /X for updates of new videos, as well as when I make new blog posts on my website. Hopefully I will see you back here soon for more reviews and other kinds of content.